Today's episode is a crossover between Trip Talks and Flourish by Ayurveda Health. I've always been interested in the intersection of Eastern and Western paths to wellness, and how different traditions answer the question, what does it mean to live well? Ayurveda is one of those systems I've been curious about for a long time. It offers a framework for self-care and balance that looks very different than what we may grow up with in Western culture. In this conversation, I sit down with Kate O'Donnell, author and longtime Ayurvedic practitioner, to explore what Ayurveda looks like in real life. Kate is a gift for translating this ancient wisdom to something practical, from how we eat to how we move throughout the day. Whether you're new to Ayurveda or simply interested in different ways of understanding health and wellness, this one's for you. Today, I am excited to speak with Kate O'Donnell. Kate began traveling to India at the age of 20 and has done more than a dozen extended trips to India and 25 years studying the wisdom traditions of the subcontinent, and those support Kate's practice of yoga and Ayurveda. Kate O'Donnell is the author of 4 Ayurveda cookbooks, including The Everyday Ayurveda Cook, and she is a nationally certified Ayurvedic practitioner and founder of the Ayurvedic Living Institute. Kate, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. I am definitely not an expert in Ayurveda, but thankfully you are. But just to kick this off, we crossed paths first when my now wife was practicing yoga with you up in Boston, and had the opportunity to practice with you a few times there. And then you all moved to Portland, Maine. And I'm just curious, are you still involved in yoga at all, or has most of your focus shifted to Ayurveda?
Yeah, I mean, professionally, I taught yoga full-time, Ashtanga yoga, for at least 12 years. And when we moved our geography, I stopped teaching. So my community was in Boston. And when we moved north, Rich does teach. He has a program, an Ashtanga program here, but I started really shifting my work. I had already published 2 books at that point in Ayurveda, and there was a lot of opportunity there for me. And I was trying to do it all. So for many years, I was like writing books, doing Ayurveda consults, being on faculty at Ayurveda schools, plus teaching Mysore from 6 to 8 in the morning. So something had to give. So I gave up the teaching of yoga and feel very satisfied with the decades that I did devote to that.
My understanding of Ayurveda, and I saw an Ayurvedic practitioner, I think twice when I was in Mysore. But to me, I always heard it as, well, it's yoga's sister science. And I've usually thought about it in terms of diet and certain, like a couple kind of wellness related activities, whether that's, for me, I guess, like oil pulling. I don't really do the castor oil baths, but that's really my only framing of it. And so I'd be curious how those two are related, the yoga and the Ayurveda.
Yeah. Well, they're called sister sciences because they both stem from the Samkhya philosophy. So the understanding of the world, the body, and the components of a body and a self are the same. So the anatomy in yoga and Ayurveda is the same. The aim of both is of a spiritual nature, but the understanding is that in yoga, it's really very much about a purification and an evolution of the self. And there's a lot of the mind involved in, the consciousness, evolution of consciousness. In Ayurveda, it's very much for householders. So it's for people who have kids and jobs, and kind of have to move through their karmas in this lifetime. We're not trying to supersede any of that. Like we're in the muck, and we're living our daily life. And so there's a certain amount of health, that was necessary in order to do your karmas, do what you came here to do. And so the healthier that you can maintain your vehicle, the more you can serve during your years of service. And the more you can then, hopefully, as you age, you'll have more time and less distraction of disease to then evolve consciousness. See, the ashramas, or the different stages of life in the Vedic knowledge, are, I think, very important here. I kind of came to yoga very young and put the cart before the horse. And I was like, time to get enlightened,
Right.
like all through my 20s. And so I was doing shad kriyas. I was like sucking, salt water through orifices and doing all these really strong practices that you find in the yoga teachings. And then I messed myself up. I had a lot of problems in my body, my digestion and my lymph from the parasites, but also from doing weird crap to my that was not always necessary. And so when I met the Ayurveda, these sort of, you say wellness, you talk about like wellness routines,
Uh-huh.
and they're like mini kriyas. So,
Okay. Yeah.
there's this idea that, bodies, as the metabolic processes are going on in your body, just like in your car, it creates waste. So there's like exhaust, and there's some
Mm-hmm.
dripping. And so you need to kind of keep the pipes clean, in your body. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Ayurveda, rather than kind of trying to purify you, it's like mini bits every day. In a
Mm-hmm.
24-hour cycle, there's a certain amount of nourishment, a certain amount of detox that go on. And so we clean the eyes, we scrape the tongue, we oil
Mm-hmm.
the nose, we oil the ears, we oil the skin. So those are all things that we do to just kind of support the health of the body, mind
Mm-hmm.
throughout the course of your normal and somewhat busy life. And the idea is that as you get older, your responsibilities become less. You move into those later stages of life where there's more time and energy for yoga, and we actually become more subtle beings as we get older. So it's like this nice progression through the life, that I found through studying Ayurveda and yoga together, and it
Yeah.
helped me like ratchet it down with some of the intensity in the yoga that was not always appropriate for my body type or the
Mm-hmm.
abilities that I had or where my climate that I lived in, So Ayurveda helped me kind of get this package going where I can still practice yoga and I still do, but it's part of my life. It's not my entire life.
Tell me a little bit, what hooked you to the Ayurveda piece?
It was honestly, it was like sort of a spiritual awakening for
Uh-huh.
me that happened through the Panchakarma process. I did a 3-week residential immersion at the hospital in Mysore, and I just somewhere in the third week there, it was like everything opened up, and I really felt my body in a different way, as a spiritual vehicle. And it was very much an embodied experience. It wasn't something I had read about or expected, It was just this sort of thing where it was like angels were singing and trumpets were blaring, and I was just like, I understand, for like 10 minutes. And then after that experience, I was like, okay, whatever that was, we gotta get back to that. So
Yeah,
that's
well, hold on. What led up to kind of that culmination 10-minute experience? Well, I don't know the Panchakarma process.
Panchakarma is it's really a deep cleansing process.
Mm-hmm.
It takes 3 weeks. You have to be in a residential center, so you're not like going to work. You're not doing anything else really, but devoting your time to the process, which is it's viewed not as something that only happens in your body. In Ayurveda, your soul, your body, and your mind are all inextricably linked. They're all components of the system. So the idea when you do the Panchakarma process is like an overhaul.
Could you kind of maybe like walk me through like maybe a day of Ayurvedic practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. So so what happens is the first thing, let's start in the morning. All right, let's
Mm-hmm.
start with waking. So the ideal story is we're waking with the sun. So we're
Mm-hmm.
always rowing our boat with the rhythms of nature. So for those in the northern climes, that will change. The timing of it will change, but you're kind of getting up around the sun. If you get up a little bit before the sunrise, that's your Brahma Muhurta, which is God's hour, God's time. And so that's a great time for yoga practices and spiritual study or also academic study. Like the
Mm-hmm.
mind is clear at that time. And then once you wake, you want that clear quality to also move into the bowels and urinary tract. So the ideal is that there's time in the morning for pooping and peeing. And then we do the purification of the sense organs. So that's your tongue scraping, you
Mm.
rinse with cool water. We apply a little oil to the ears, the nose, the skin, then you do your bathing. And then you go for drinking hot water. And you let that sort of appetite, you do all the cleaning before you put the stuff in.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
You can start, so you can have your hot water, of course, but all of this cleansings happen before you eat. And it doesn't take
Mm-hmm.
long, it's like this 15, 20-minute deal. Then you have your sort of first meal of the day, which would ideally be something a little bit lighter.
Mm-hmm.
You're exercising. Some people like to exercise in the morning. That's a good time for it. And then the middle of the day is a pitta cycle. So when the
Mm.
sun is highest, it's like between 10 and 2 is said to be the time for optimal digestion.
Mm.
So that's a great time. So if you want to have, those pitta aggravating foods, it's actually better to have them in the middle of the day. You'll sleep
Okay.
better. You won't be as amped at night.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of harness that energy as you move into the afternoon, which is
Mm-hmm.
a creative energy. It's a vata time. It's a lot of movement. Some people get tired during that time, especially if they've been moving and active all day.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's mental activity or physical activity, people can get blown out during that afternoon cycle. And then you move into, so there's a kapha cycle. So that's like that heaviness and that
Mm-hmm.
inertia and that slowness from 6 to 10 p.m. So between 6 and 10 is not the best time to eat, especially heavy foods, because
Mm-hmm.
that's already at the time where your body's heavy and slow, unless you need to gain weight, which
Mm-hmm.
some people do. But it's more of sort of like you had your big lunch and then your kind of smaller dinner, a little
Mm-hmm.
smaller, or a little bit lighter. Maybe it's more carbs
Mm-hmm.
and less fats and proteins and things. And then you move towards sleep. Ideally, you catch the window. You mentioned the second wind, which if
Mm-hmm.
people pay attention, I promise you will notice that that second wind is around 10 p.m. And that's because your pitta comes in for the second pitta cycle, and that's 10
Mm-hmm.
p.m. to 2 a.m. And that is when your body does detox. So it's like your liver cooks the blood. So
Mm-hmm.
if the food and the digestion's already moved through, so say you ate at like 7, so 3 hours later by 10, that's ideal. So there's like this sort of 2 or 3 hour thing between eating and sleeping where
Mm-hmm.
you allow the digestion to happen. And you'll sleep better because you don't have digestive enzymes fighting with your sleep hormones. And then when you're asleep, that's when your body cleans itself, which is why when we wake up in the morning, we do the cleansings,
Yeah.
right? The peeing, the pooping, the eyes, the tongue, the ears, all that.
I'm very curious because food plays such a big role in everyone's life, right? Um, but how do you see that kind of relating to maybe the Enlightenment Project? You had a peak spiritual experience kind of in a Ayurvedic hospital. You've got this long-standing yoga practice. How do these kind of work together?
Mm. I think I love this conversation trip about food, yoga, evolution, and daily life.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get these things to work together? And how can our food support us? And this was where, you read the yoga texts and they talk about food in a very specific way, like a moderate intake of food. Certain foods are to be avoided, and they're usually the ones that create wind. Yeah, so like vegetables. So I
Mm-hmm.
am like 21 years old reading, this book that says I shouldn't eat vegetables.
Yeah.
Of course, as you said, like what is the purpose of this practice? But if you cook the vegetables, they will be less windy than if you eat them raw in a salad. So Ayurveda also then taught me these finer points about how the preparation of food changes its qualities, changes its metabolic processes in your body. So I'd gotten to the place where you got to take a long view, which of course neither of us did when we were young, right? You think I'm gonna just like take this yoga thing and just beat it up or beat myself up
Right.
with until I've arrived. And then you realize, oh well, actually, all of these texts and all of these philosophies from Hatha Yoga Pradipika forward are really teaching that your body is your vehicle, it is your temple, it's your method of enlightenment in this
Mm-hmm.
life. And so the body needs to be, in Ayurveda, there's basically two things that always need to remain in balance, and that is the health. It's nourishment and purification. Those two things need to be given equal clout,
Mm-hmm.
in a 24-hour cycle. And so one might think, and I think a lot of yoga people think, like fasting and eating less, is the answer. But depending on the kind of practices you're doing, you can actually create health problems, by
Mm-hmm.
not nourishing the body, because your vessel needs to hold the energy that the
Mm-hmm.
yoga creates, and that's how you change consciousness and evolve. But if your body's not up to that task, you're just going to burn. You're going to burn up like a shooting star.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of conversations about like the kinds of foods that support yoga and
Mm-hmm.
support the channels in the body, their ability to manage that kind of nerve energy that moves, when you
Mm-hmm.
yoga practices. And not all yoga works that way, right? There's some that, like, we of course both chose this stronger path, but
Mm-hmm.
there's other kinds of yoga where it's a lot more about down regulating all the
Yeah.
time. I think that's what a lot of people find now in yoga.
Tell me if I'm correct in this one. This is one of the pieces that I took from someone in terms of Ayurveda was the drinking of water and how that happens in relation to when we eat. So I either read or I believe I read it, but so I try not to drink water during meals for the most part, maybe a little, usually warm water throughout the day, but not 20 minutes before and 2 hours after. Is that
Yeah.
generally kind of like guidance?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Ayurveda text they'll say that those who drink water right before the meal, they will become emaciated, which is it's
Mm.
kind of, you're like diluting your digestion. So it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to get the nutrition from your food. And it says that those who drink the water after the meal will become stout. So sort of waterlogged,
Right,
right?
right.
Like a excess amount of moisture in the nutrient fluid, and therefore in all of the cells in the body. So the idea is, and I want to say that we don't have to be like crazy over this.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, but in general, what I notice is that people, you go through your day and then you stop to eat and you're trying to hydrate at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Problematic. People are like, hydrate, eat, all in the same half hour. Like, that is not a great flow, And so what you're doing, practicing kind of being aware that you're going to eat in about 20 minutes and not drinking
Mm-hmm.
water. Like a little sip of something, okay, but not like we're, chugging ounces
Right.
of water. And the same is true after the meal. And I'll make a distinction between like drinking water and drinking digestive teas.
Mm-hmm.
So you can boil spices in water and then make a little tea that will actually help your digestion, right? Or, you're hydrating. You just ate, 30 minutes later, you're drinking 8 to 10 ounces of water. Like that
Mm-hmm.
that will not help the digestion. I do think for most people, it will take about 2 hours for a meal to exit the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's fair game to, okay, we can hydrate now,
Yeah, that's one of those tips that when I practice it, I notice that I feel way more stable and steady throughout the day. But it is those times where, yeah, you forgot to drink any water and now you're eating a meal, then you're weighted down. I'd be curious, so that one is for me the most important because I'm way too attached to my garlic and onions and spicy food, but I can deal with like monitoring my water intake a little bit. What are some of the tips or techniques that you've found like people are the most surprised either for you personally that you put into practice or folks that you've worked with that they're like, I just get these great results from this intervention? What's
Yeah.
your top one or two?
Top one is learning not to eat before the previous meal has been digested.
Mm.
It's huge. So a lot of the gas and the bloating and the messed up poops that people experience
Mm-hmm.
because, like, so I tell the story. Imagine you're going to make rice. So you're like, okay, 2 cups of water, a cup of rice. So you put a half a cup of the rice in there with the water and you cook it for 10 minutes. And then you're like, oh, let's put the other half in now. Right. And so then you cook it for 10 minutes and then you're like, oh, it's not done yet. So you keep cooking it. And then you end up with this mess of like partially undigested, partially over digested rice. Right. And it's all gross, hot. So that's what's happening in your stomach when you eat a meal. And as we just talked about, it might take 2 hours for that meal to pass through the stomach. There's like a little trap door, a little valve down there. And that is not going to open if you throw a cookie in there. Or even something healthy like an apple.
Yeah.
If you throw that in there and there's big chunks of apple, your valve is not going to open and let that food juice go down the tube. So you're waiting. Now you're waiting. Food that you ate that was this beautiful essence that was going to move into circulation and nourish your body, then starts to kind of putrefy in there while we wait for that apple or that cookie or whatever it is. So it's like learning to eat and then just be cool for a couple hours.
And you mentioned rowing kind of with the cycles of nature. So I know there's some seasonality to what we do as well. Could you speak to maybe a little seasonality and then any other cycles?
Oh yeah, for sure. So the annual cycle, what I call it, is like your seasons. No matter where you live, there are seasons. In some places it's 50 degrees difference, in other places it's 10 degrees, right? And the humidity is changing a little bit or a lot. And it's all relative, to where you live. But everyone, no matter where they are, has seasons. So there's times where it's hotter and colder and moist and dry, relatively. Our body is undergoing changes based on that, right? So your fire element, for example, might be a little more difficult to manage in hot weather, especially towards the end of that season where it's been going on for a while. So in Ayurvedic cuisine, and this is the Everyday Ayurveda cookbook, is my first book. It's like a seasonal flow, right? So the idea is that you start cooking your food in the autumn. You move away from eating melons, which you might have enjoyed in the summer, and then you move into squashes and oatmeal and sourdough toast. You start eating these foods that are a little heavier because the weather's drier. You start cooking your food and serving it warm because it's cold out. You sort of move through the year. It gets all rainy and damp in spring, so we try to dry the system out. We eat more greens. We cook with fenugreek. So you move through with your spices and your food choices and how you prepare your food. You're always like cycling. And that way your body doesn't get too moist or too dry or too hot or too cold, because that's how imbalances get their foothold.
And then what about for women? Are there other cycles? And I think you have a new book out. So I'd love to hear kind of how some of this advice may change specific for women.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which is, everyone is affected by the moon. It's like lunar cycle is another thing that's happening. So if you talk to farmers, the ancient practice of farming is to plant your seeds when the moon is full, because the moon is pulling the moisture to the surface of the soil. So there'll be more moisture for the seeds during that fortnight. So our bodies, the water element is also being sort of pulled to the surface. So that for women would correspond to ovulation, because that's all the reproductive juices are all about water element. And so it's like somebody wants to get pregnant, for example, or doesn't want to, they'd look at that time of month potentially as the time, where there's more moisture. As some people will notice it in their fluids, in their eyes, like these little differences are happening over the course of the month. So women are, very much, there's a 28, 29-day cycle for menstruation, which mirrors what the moon does, which is so amazing. Humans of all sorts, whether they're in menopause or they don't bleed, humans are under the pull of, according to Vedic sciences, under the pull of the celestial bodies and planetary influences, the moon being one of those big ones that's a lot closer to this planet than something like Venus, So we're constantly, there's times where you'll feel more awake and more alert and more like social. And then at the dark moon is the time where things kind of quiet down. Which one of the things, Trip, that I see problematic these days, causing a lot of diseases, especially for women's sex hormones, is that we're not necessarily finding a nice balance between activity and rest.
Mm.
That's starting to affect the stress to sex hormone balance. So that's what my new book is about, the Everyday Ayurveda for Women's Health. And it's this, the thing about the bright moon and the dark moon is it kind of sets, if you gently observe that and kind of follow along with that, which in the yoga traditions, you always know if it's a full moon or a new moon, because you practice differently around those times. That's what we were taught. So you know there's a time where you're going to be like gangbusters, jamming, doing stuff, getting stuff done. And then there's a time where you might feel more tired, like it's a time to let the soil be fallow and just kind of, maybe you want to sleep more. So if we were enjoying a cycle like that, let's say 2 weeks moving towards like an up vibe and then 2 weeks towards a down vibe, the idea is that we get that balance between nourishment and purification, between activity and rest. And that's the basis of our health.
For me, I feel like the routines I'm thinking about a lot are like, when does the voice in my head settle down? What are the causes and conditions that lead up to that? And I would imagine Ayurveda has a lot to say about what we're doing with our bodies besides asana practice. So I'm very curious, like what, for me, I'm interested in, again, calming down a little bit or being more peaceful. If I were coming for an Ayurvedic consult, like where would we begin that's why I came to you?
Yeah. Well, you're ahead of the game because you already see this, the story that's happening in your mind and body. And there's the desires that are driving you, in a certain direction. And then there's this kind of like backlash, from your movements towards what you desire. The thing that struck me about Ayurveda very early on was how much you can create change in the substratum of the body to support the more subtle aspects of yourself. So I feel like from Western science, we're going to say the mind is over here and the body's over here. Right? So like chill out, calm down, right? And like not be trying to do everything all the time. He just wants to be more mellow. But I'm not going to look just at your mental fields. I'm also going to, are there conditions in the substance of the body that are feeding that energy? Right. So it's like fire, we'd say fire element is the issue here, right? Maybe he's like, got a little too much raging fire and we want to kind of take that down a notch. And what you find is that we can do that through, applying substances to your body that cool fire, changing the diet. So maybe there's things you're eating or drinking that are encouraging that kind of sharp, mobile, intense energy. We switch out some of that stuff. We can use herbal medicines that manage, again, that fire element, and all these things, they then create ideal conditions and so whatever's going on in your mind, that desire that's driving you and the things that you're moving towards, that all, your ability to see that all just becomes so clearer. Because it's like we just, there was like a fire in your backyard and we just like put the hose on that. So then you're like, the smoke clears and then you're like, okay, now what do we have? Now what is the energy in my body and where, is calmer? Am I still driving with the same intensity? So there's so many avenues. Usually it's going to have to do with your sense organs. Those are one of the big foundations in Ayurvedic health. And so we'd look at, the input for your senses, like how much screen time is there? How much are we listening to podcasts? How much are we, talking? How much are we taking in? How much are we putting out? And so we'd look at that. What times of day you're doing that? If you're doing some of that stuff in the middle of the night, that's going to be problematic for this pitta. Right? It will balance itself during that pitta time of night. But if a person's up rocking and rolling during that time, that problem is going to become tenfold. So
Mm-hmm.
your dinacharya, or your daily rhythm,
Yeah.
sometimes the things that are happening or the things that we're eating at certain times, if we just tweak the timing of it, you can get a really good result. So we look at all that input, whether it's food or information or sensory stimulus,
Mm-hmm.
and we look for what are the things there that have the same qualities to the ones that are making you feel crazy. And we're going to introduce the opposite qualities. So we'll say, what's the time of day where the body wants to be mellow anyway? Let's look at what's happening during that time. Let's apply some substances to your body or to your food that are going to calm you down. So you can come at it from all the angles, which
Which
I
is,
love.
I feel slightly shamed now because some of this is what I already know, but then I'm gonna go home tonight and I'm gonna want to have my really like spicy chili oil on my dinner and my onions and my garlic, right? And then I wonder why I'm all wound up at night and get that second wind. What's the from your practice or experience, the overlap maybe that you've seen with, again, I think we talked about, sometimes coming to these practices, we can approach it maybe dogmatic and rigidly, as opposed to just like, again, being in the flow of things and working with our cycles. I'm curious, when do you work with someone, or have you seen people needing additional support, maybe from Western science? Like I'm thinking specifically, and the crazy Ashtanga yoga kind of tradition, is there can be almost an encouragement to very restrictive eating, and how kind of Ayurvedic practice maybe addresses some of that and helps us live with more intuition about what's really going on in our bodies.
Yeah, that's where I learned that was from Ayurveda for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's conversations in the Ayurveda texts about how our food should be pleasant to us, how we might use flavoring agents like rose water, salt, spices, uh, aromatherapy,
Mm.
and there's a real focus on beauty, and that the nourishment of the senses
Mm.
happens. Where this is, I think, this conversation that we're having today, we keep talking about sort of the differences between the yoga and the Ayurveda. So in the yoga, it's more of a renunciant path.
Mm-hmm.
Purpose, less distractions. We quiet the senses. We do the pratyahara. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Ayurveda is like, oh no, you're in this body. You are here to, enjoy. And so there's flavors and there's colors and there's scents, and all of these things are subtle forms of nourishment, for the soul as well as for the tissues of the body. That is what I learned, about food from Ayurveda. That has now, food to me is like a sacred thing that happens, several times
Mm-hmm.
a day. And also the nourishment of the body for the householder. The
Mm-hmm.
nourishment of the body is absolutely essential. We have to take care of people. We have to be part of our culture, our society. If we're not doing that, if we're monastic,
Mm-hmm.
renunciates, that's different. But 99.99% of us, especially those listening, right, are probably householders. I think we get confused by the yoga texts because they're speaking to renunciants, where the Ayurveda
Mm-hmm.
texts are very clearly speaking to people who have things to do, which
Yeah.
most of us need that kind of support, nutritional support for the life that we're living.
Awesome. Well, two final questions. One, what is your Ayurvedic cheat or yogic cheat that you should be doing something, but you're not going to give this up because it adds too much joy to your life?
Ooh, oh yeah, chai.
Chai.
Caffeine. Not to say that caffeine is bad and is anti-Ayurvedic or anti-yogic. As you know, Ashtanga people drink a ton of caffeine, but personally for me, it is not great. I know it pushes my Vata button, and like
Mm-hmm.
pushes the anxiety button for me. But I love my chai. I still have most of the year I'm drinking a little chai every day.
Awesome. And then, where can listeners find you online if they want to go a little deeper?
Those who are on Instagram can find me at kateodonnell.ayurveda. There's tons of stuff going on there. I also have a podcast, which is Everyday Ayurveda with Kate, where we talk Ayurveda once a week. And my website is ayurvedicliving.institute. So that's where you can find sort of mentorships, fall cleanse, spring cleanse, all sorts of courses, classes, and community offerings. I feel like a lot of people in yoga and Ayurveda, depending where you live, it can get lonely. So a big part of what I've tried to do with the Institute is create community offerings, times where people can come together and practice this stuff.
Awesome. Well, Kate, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down and chat, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Trip Talks. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend, leave a review in your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to What a Trip on Substack. You can find it at tripjohnson.substack.com. That's TRIPPJOHNSON.substack.com. Thanks a lot.